The evolution of industrial safety in Britain. From Factory Acts to Future Frontiers. On a cold morning in February 1838, Elizabeth Butcher, a 12-year-old textile worker in Manchester, became one of the first documented cases that would transform Britain's approach to industrial safety. Her death, caused by becoming entangled in an unguarded power transmission belt, sparked an investigation by the newly appointed factory inspector, Leonard Horner. This tragic incident, one of countless others, crystallized the urgent need for systematic workplace protection, a need that would shape British industrial legislation for generations to come. The industrial landscape of early 19th century Britain was a treacherous terrain. In Bradford's wool-combing factories, workers as young as 6 endured 14-hour days amidst machinery that could maim in an instant. Manchester's cotton mills reverberated with the thunder of power looms, their operators breathing thick with cotton dust that would eventually claim many through the dreaded brown lung disease, bicyanosis. These conditions weren't merely harsh, they represented a complete absence of systematic safety consideration. The Factory Act of 1833 emerged as Britain's first meaningful response to these conditions. While its initial scope was limited, focusing primarily on textile mills, its introduction of factory inspectors marked the birth of governmental oversight in workplace safety. These inspectors, though numbering just 4 for the entire country, wielded unprecedented authority to enter workplaces, examine conditions, and prosecute violations. The Act also introduced the revolutionary concept of age restrictions for workers and mandatory education for child workers, establishing the principle that industrial progress couldn't come at the cost of society's most vulnerable. Subsequent legislation built upon these foundations in response to specific industrial tragedies. The Mines Act of 1842, for instance, arose following the devastating Husker Colliery disaster of 1838, where 26 children drowned in a mine shaft. This act banned women and children under 10 from working underground, a restriction that seems modest by modern standards but represented a radical shift in industrial regulation for its time. The Factory Act of 1878 marked another watershed moment, consolidating decades of piecemeal legislation into a comprehensive framework. It introduced specific requirements for machinery guarding, workplace ventilation, and maximum working hours. More significantly, it established the principle of employer liability for workplace accidents, a concept that would eventually evolve into modern occupational safety law. As Britain entered the 20th century, new industrial processes brought new hazards. The emergence of the chemical industry, exemplified by the expansion of facilities like ICI's Billingham plant in the 1920s, introduced risks of toxic exposure and industrial-scale accidents. The interwar period saw the development of the first systematic approaches to process safety, including the introduction of safety committees and the concept of preventive maintenance. The post-war era heralded a new age in safety thinking. The Factories Act 1961 introduced more stringent requirements for workplace safety, including specific provisions for dangerous substances and protective equipment. However, it was the Flixborough disaster of 1974, where a chemical plant explosion killed 28 workers and devastated a village, that catalyzed the most significant reform in British safety legislation, the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. This landmark act revolutionized workplace safety through several key innovations. It introduced the concept of reasonably practicable measures, creating a risk-based approach to safety management that would influence legislation worldwide. The Act's General Duties Clause placed responsibility on both employers and employees, recognizing safety as a shared obligation. Perhaps most importantly, it established the Health and Safety Executive, HSE, as an independent regulator with broad investigative and enforcement powers. The Act's flexibility proved prescient as Britain's industrial landscape evolved. When the Piper Alpha disaster claimed 167 lives in 1988, the existing framework could accommodate the resulting Cullen Report's recommendations, leading to the development of the safety case regime for high-hazard industries. This approach, requiring organizations to demonstrate the safety of their operations proactively, has since been adopted globally, particularly in the oil and gas sector.